Okay, great. Uh, well, hola everyone. Thank you for the organizers, first of all, both of the CISAN and also the CEMIC, for the invitation, and also thank you all for taking the time out of your Friday to be part of this conversation on the multiple and also intersecting music cultures and communities of Los Angeles. In terms of a bit of my dissertation, I do look at ethnic Mexican, as we call people of Mexican descent that are either born in the United States or people that have migrated from Mexico. So the way we historians think of the term ethnic Mexican is to encompass the Mexican experience, both people born within the nation state and also people that are born in the U.S. or in the diaspora. So that's who I study, and as I am a part of the diaspora myself, and just in terms of how I think of my work and also my connection to my work, this study is part of this this very established but still emerging field of Mexican American history, looking at the history of the Mexican presence rather than just immigration, of the Mexican presence in the American Southwest for now close to 2 centuries. And I became interested in youth cultures or music cultures of Latino, Latina, Latinx, and from here on I'll be using the term Latinx as a non-gender, more inclusive term. I came to think of it and to study it as I was a participant of these cultural scenes, these music scenes in my younger days. But one, it was obviously, as Michael said, the night and what is the Los Angeles night offers to in terms of leisure entertainment, but also what are the identity making possibilities and the political possibilities of these gatherings by youth, ethnic Mexican youth, Latinx youth, and people of color youth that are not represented, are not welcome due to these long histories of segregation and racism in the public space of Los Angeles. So that's how I came about. And also in thinking about this, it was part of my personal experience of how these spaces, these musics, allows to be part of these circuits of sharing of culture, sharing of ideas, and cultural expressions between Los Angeles, other cities within the U.S., and as part of these circuits, Latin America as well. So that's how I came to this study. So now I'll share some of the main themes of my research, my book manuscript, and also my theoretical interventions, in addition to the Rock Archivo LA, which is my public history project.
Thank
And of
you.
course, I can talk a little bit more about, like kind of my, what else do I think of this in terms of, in terms of my research directions, broadly defined within the Mexican American history, U.S. history canon. So I'll share my screen now. And let me, give me a sec. Okay, start. You're all able to see the main screen, right? If you,
Yes.
okay, perfect. So my research, as I said, centers on the late 20th century Southern California, the cultural production in form of music, print culture through magazines or fanzines, and placemaking done and engaged by Latinx, which are informed by the sharing of cultural expressions between Southern California and Latin America. So here's the very quick overview of my presentation. And in here, just to clarify some of the terms I'll be using, I examine Latin American and U.S. Latinx youth cultures, and around what we call rock latinoamericano, rock en español, that emerged in Latin America as a music genre in terms of a massive popularity in the 1980s and 90s, And it also became popular in Southern California, where an eager and enterprising group of young women and men began to create their own distinct version of the genre, which I define as Rock Angelino, a more metropolitan and area located genre. Yet, as a music genre, Latin American rock has long had been associated with the so-called counterculture, or at least with oppositional politics in different Latin American countries. In Southern California, the music, the articles printed in these independent publications that emerged within the Rock Angelino scene, and also the spatial manifestations in the form of music venues, which I define as ephemeral forums, were crucial for Latin American immigrants and also US-born Latinx to create bridges of solidarity between Latinx of different national origins, citizenship status, and also legal migratory categories. This to claim themselves as part of Southern California. And as I said, I look at the 1980s, 1990s, which was a moment and continues to be an era of demographic change, economic restructuring, racial tensions, and anti-immigrant politics. And in my analysis, I also define this as instances of transnational and pan-Latin American solidarities, as I think of them as mutual remittances of sound and solidarity. So first, I think it's important to provide a structural context of the region and the time period being examined. So from the 1980s and 90s, and here you can see some markers of economic and political moments in the history of Mexico, in the recent history of Mexico. It's not inclusive, as my work centers on Southern California, but definitely what was happening in Mexico, in the different countries in Central America and even South America, had an influence in what in how people understood the politics, also the shapes of migration, and also the political awareness between Southern California and Latin America. What we see in terms of a timeline, this is something thinking of this transnational timeline of how the Latinx population surges in California to 35% of the whole state. At the same time, we have a recession. The Cold War formally ends, but and with this, the rush to end the Civil War, which a proxy Cold War in El Salvador. The accords are signed in Chapultepec in 1992. But this continues to push and migration from El Salvador, also from Guatemala, to the U.S. And then we'll see, of course, NAFTA in 92, the SZLN uprising in 94, and these other propositions we'll all discuss in a bit. So from the 1980s and 1990s, the population in Los Angeles County saw a decrease of white residents, and also the emergence of this non-white population majority, with Latinx being the largest non-ethnic white group. So the rise of Latinx residents, it is a confluence of these different political economic factors, such as the immigration from Mexico and Central America, generated by the implementation of neoliberal policies. In the case of Mexico, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, that crystallizes a process that had already been happening. These waves of migration, no longer from the countryside, but also from the urban space. And this transforms Mexico's economy, and the daily life, makes the daily life economically precarious for many Mexicans. Conversely, California received these increased flows of Central American immigrants fleeing the violence of civil wars in El Salvador, Guatemala. So the increase of a Latinx population in Southern California, which takes place during this decade of the 1990s, along with the recession, with an economic recession, and the heightened racial tensions in Los Angeles, with ongoing cases of police brutality, which, as we see, this continues to be the case. And in 1992, produces the LA crisis, which colloquially we think of them as the LA riots, that derives from the beating of a black motorist, Rodney King, and detonates one of the most destructive social eruptions in the American history. This heightened economic, racial, and demographic tensions would also result in a relentless anti-immigrant social and political backlash in the form of Proposition 187. This is an electoral initiative embraced and championed by the then California Governor Pete Wilson. And Prop 187 sought to deny any type of public services to undocumented immigrants. This would have affected thousands of people and people they knew in their communities. This initiative, in conjunction to these other so-called racial propositions, were put on the ballot and actually approved by the California voters in the mid 1990s. And here, scholars like Daniel Song Martinez thinks of this as these racial propositions that sought to perpetuate white political dominance over an emergent and majority non-white population. And I can speak more about this in the Q&A in terms of the macro conditions. So it is in this social, economic, and racial and political moment that throughout their cultural expressions and placemaking, Latinx Rock Angelino participants claim themselves as part of Southern California and push against this anti-immigrant rhetoric in the 1990s, while advocating equality and social justice in the US, as well as a democratic aperture in Latin America. So in terms of my manuscript, these are the central contributions I think I make to, I'm intending to make, which is cultural production generated by young Latinx in the 1990s, created more encompassing understandings of ethnic identity, dignity, and also solidarity. This also transnational cultural expressions created more expansive claims of belonging, of beyond the state-defined constructs of citizenship. And also, they did, through this cultural expression, this Latinx youth push against the xenophobia directed at them at this time. And today, I'll be talking much more about placemaking by immigrants and US born, who refuse to live in the shadows, who refuse to live in just at the margins of society. And I do this by documenting what has been undocumented. As I said, I'll discuss this a little bit more when I tell you about my public history project, which is the Rock Archivo LA. But it is a way of documenting the dignity and also the defiance against marginalization of the so-called undocumented. How do they take these icons, symbols, and these attacks, visual attacks, and also political attacks, and use them in their own cultural production to push against this, while also asserting themselves their dignity? So the cultural production generated by these Rock Angelino participants, it is a new point of intervention in the current historical research, focusing in the last third of the 20th century and also in near-present Southern California. So by examining cultural expressions created many times by immigrants themselves, this enables to document the undocumented, the people who are often silenced, spoken for, be it in the media or in the political message or their archival sources. So a cultural history approach allows us to see the immigrants and US Latinx born as cultural producers, organic intellectuals who employ these cultural expressions in strategic, symbolic, and spatial forms to mark themselves as dignified and defiant members of Southern California. And also, as a transnational history study, my work enables us to consider the historical and continuous connections between Latinx communities in the US and Latin America, and how these circuits of cultural exchange create social spaces, the replenishment of ethnic identities for US-born Latinx, and who understood themselves connected to the contemporary Latin American culture and politics. So now that I discussed a little bit of what my interventions are, I'll just tell you a bit of the theoretical interventions that my work offers. One is the concept of ephemeral forms. This to analyze the long traditions of how ethnic Mexicans, Latinx, and people of color have created spaces and belongings in the racialized and segregated urban space of the US metropolis. This builds upon my earlier work on Mexican theme malls, shopping malls such as Plaza Mexico in the city of Linwood here in Southern California, that features actually this replica of El Ángel, and also other replicas of iconic Mexican landmarks as a way of appealing to the majority ethnic Mexican clientele. So, and my other theoretical intervention, it is the mutual remittances of sound and solidarity. I employ this concept of mutual remittances as much more than just economic sending sending and receiving, but also of how sound solidarity ideas explore this multi-directional circulation of intellectual traditions between Latin American, Latina immigrants in Southern California. So now I'll talk about the ephemeral forums. So after a long day of work, of being ostracized, mistreated, or at best ignored in Los Angeles, the LA Night has long been the host for Latinx youth who yearn to come together, to dance to syncopated ska and punk beats, and do so assert their belonging in Southern California. However, prominent music venues located in Hollywood that has always been read as a white space has long excluded musicians and audiences of color. Thus, going to Hollywood was not a possibility due to this social segregation of the city. All the way through the beginning of the 20th century, and we can argue that even today. So where did these people, these rockeras, rockeros, punk rockers, and skankers, meet in the LA Night? Well, here's where the ingenuity and enterprising came in. They created their own improvised venues, which I call them ephemeral forums. So the ephemeral forums were these improvised sites and music events that took place in mostly Latinx neighborhoods. This could be backyards, cocheras if you think about warehouses, mechanic auto shops, and other spaces that the youth could use in the absence of formal music venues. So these ephemeral forums in Latinx Los Angeles are part of this genealogy of do-it-yourself ethos for marginalized music scenes in the U.S. And it also draws from the legacies of the Hoyos Funky, which were and are improvised music venues in the working class periphery of Mexico City. The backyard gig, the unorthodox storefront as a venue has a long tradition that is rooted in its own social, racial, and gender context. So to get to one of these tocadas, this place at the ephemeral forums, what you had is in the 1990s, before the advent of Google Maps, you needed directions. And if you're an immigrant or if you are somebody that doesn't travel much outside their neighborhood, these directions would come quite handy. They were included in these flyers. So to get there, the event producers created these hand-drawn flyers. And the creators of these flyers were either immigrants or second-generation Latinx. And this is how they mapped out and respatialized their own metropolitan Los Angeles, both sonically and cartographically. So here's one example where not only you see the direction of where this backyard gig was going to happen, it's clearly marked that it's going to be Rock en Español, but then you also see the temporality. You see the freeway, this highway, and in there, whoever did this map maker added rush hour, which also gives us an idea what around what hour this event would be happening. Rush hour, la hora tráfico happens here from 4 to 6, but then these days it's from 4 to 8. But I mean, you still see not only the temporality, but also mapping the space and also asserting themselves in this space. So through these special ephemeral forums, Latinx made spatial claims of belonging in the metropolis, and also to continue the exchange of cultural expressions and political advocacy in the 1990s. And in here, I'll just so what did it feel? What did it look like? What were these spaces like? What did it sounded like? So I'm just going to play a quick video. This is from a festival called Guateque that was actually it took place in the grounds or parking lot of what was the former Los Angeles jail in the neighborhood of Lincoln Heights. By the 1990s, the jail had been decommissioned, and it was used as cultural community space where these shows happen. And do excuse the shakiness of the video. band playing, their name is Los Olvidados, taken after the Luis Buñuel movie about the Mexico City shantytowns. And this was a completely self-generated festival. As you can see, you can see the tracks of the railroad in the back, and this parking lot. So this had no formal backing. It was generated by three women of an organization called Club Rock Español that put on these festivals. And so now the other part of my theoretical interventions is the mutual remittances of sound and solidarity. This expands on the work of Juan Flores and Alicia Schmidt Camacho. Flores talks about cultural remittances that enable the circulation of cultural values between the Latin American Caribbean diasporas. And for her part, Schmidt Camacho theorizes about the migrant imaginaries, whereby Mexican migrants conceptualize and create a transnational collective experience that allows them to produce their own sense of place, which transcends the boundaries of the nation state, and even articulates a defiant and oppositional meaning of belonging, of citizenship, of all terms. So these flyers that I'm showing you here, as you can see, they're either open in Spanish or in Spanglish, and we see how the discourse and actions shared and enacted upon these ephemeral forms were at times definitely local, in the case of the left, flyer in the left, pertaining to daily experiences of the participants, such as police harassment and the further criminalization of, with approval of these laws and anti-immigrant policies. Yet, artists and participants simultaneously engage in broader transnational actions of solidarity, such as solidarity movements for the indigenous uprising in Mexico and the demand for a more democratic and participatory political governance in Latin America, which you see on the left side, such as the Rock for Chiapas. And at the lower part, you see the inclusivity, at least the language of it. All ages, all races, all welcome, all Marcos. And so, by drawing on these Latin American literary, political, and artistic movements, these mutual remittances became the intellectual toolbox to make sense of the new environment and to remain connected with the political and cultural expressions in their own countries. And so these are some of the fanzines or publications that would be shared between Mexico and Los Angeles. You see La Postmoderna here with the inaugural issue with Maldita Vecindad at the front that was heavily circulated in Los Angeles. But you also see La Banda Elástica, which started as a scene and then becomes a magazine published in Los Angeles and then shared throughout Latin America. In the second part, you see La Banda Elástica, Los Ángeles, El Rock, La Frontera, and Otros Rollos. So, with drawing were, what are the different ways of connection here between these two, between the readers of these magazines. So, yet, researching this and studying this history of ethnic Mexicans and Latinx, even of the recent past, poses challenges. Why? Because of the absence of their histories, their documents, their experiences in the institutional archive. Except for a few issues of these publications that I just mentioned, most of these sources are not part of the institutional archive. The omission of these materials makes evident that the blind spots that we have in examining the ethnic Mexican historical and contemporary experience within the U.S. academia. How the category of undocumented also extends to the archive. This, as community of color, confront this lack of documentation and presence in the academic archive. Yet, this archive of ephemera, photos, songs, and scenes that I had gathered during my research also makes visible the extensive cultural, spatial, political, and oppositional expressions of immigrants and U.S.-borns of the near past. So to make this archive visible, accessible, and also collective, I had created the Rock Archivo, which I define as a digital reflection of the archive that I share through social media, primarily Instagram. Through this post, I share what I call kernels of knowledge drawn from these archival sources. This to provide a more nuanced examination of the Latinx histories in Southern California to broader audiences. And employing social media platforms as a reflection of archives expands the possibilities for collective, more horizontal open access sharing of histories of marginalized communities with broader audiences that have yet to be fully part of the academic archive or considered as part of, which it is, intrinsical part of the American experience. And this is something that Guadalupe Rosales does quite excellently in her Instagram as well. And so for me, what has been important is being able to talk to make a collective so others contribute to it and share with it, and also has gotten some um, attention from outlets such as the New York Times and also classes that have been taught with these sources. These fragments of archival sources allow us to understand the participants of these music scenes as organic intellectuals themselves who thought of their music, their writings, and their presence, and how they inscribe themselves in Los Angeles through their writings. So, as a way of concluding, I want to state that the Rock Angelino participants drew from these extended Latin American intellectual roots and also global immigrant solidarities to make sense of their immigrant reality, to articulate their presence, their belonging, and political thinking beyond nation states. These historic moments of the 1990s, and we can think of it as the comparisons to the present, could have been a period of retrenchment, to hide from the anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies, to forget about the political features in their home countries. I'm no longer there. That does not involve me. However, through their spatial presence, their songs, writings, the Rock Angelino participants refuse to live in the shadows. Instead, they make themselves visibly, spatially, and through their expressive culture. And in doing so, they envision and propose a more expansive concept of solidarity and belonging between Southern California and Latin America. Gracias. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jorge. That's fascinating. It's a whole new understanding of archival work and heritage in the age of digital technologies. It's very, very, very interesting. And thank you